Part of our challenge is to get managers to say, well, how much time do you spend fixing things that shouldn't go wrong in the first place? How much time do you spend firefighting and trying to get the business to perform and the people and the processes? So if we could take that noise away, you'd have far more time to be proactive, to develop yourself, to develop your people, and look at the next iteration of the business, the next products coming through, for example, where to improve even further.
Hi, I'm Belden Menkus. Welcome to the Purposeful Strategist, the podcast that shifts the conversation about purpose and strategy from what organizations should do to what business leaders actually are doing and what they've learned along the way. My guest today is Steve Boam, CEO of Development Consulting, a firm with a mission to help organizations work better. Since its launch in 2018, developers use lean principles to support over 300 improvement projects across more than 50 clients. Steve's grounding in lean goes back to Toyota, where he spent the early part of his career, both in the UK and in Japan. He went on to lead KM&T, a global improvement consultancy operating across Australia, Canada, and the UK, before founding Develop Consulting in 2018. Steve, welcome to the Purposeful Strategist.
Thank you.
Really great to have you here. If you don't mind, let's just start with some real basics. Let's start with lean, because it's a big part of what you do. So what are lean principles and what impact do they have?
Lean is a Western term that was adopted by the professors to try and explain what the Japanese were doing. Now, the Japanese, particularly Toyota, started on their lean journey or their lean principles over 90 years ago. And primarily it was because they hadn't got the land, they hadn't got the resources, and they hadn't got the skills in Japan in the industrial sector. So they had to do things differently. They took a lot of their influence from Toyota, particularly from Ford, and kind of looked at what Ford were doing in terms of making vehicles, trucks and cars. And they needed trucks for the domestic market in Japan. So they took those principles, made them highly efficient, highly productive factories, looked at how we brought the parts to the people so the people didn't move. They did a set job in a set space on the line and really went about setting up their production system that worked for them. What the Western world has done for the last sort of 90 years is try to emulate and try to copy. Nobody could really describe the ecosystem and the way they developed this production system. So the badge lean was applied to it. And the professors that wrote all the books said, yeah, these are lean principles, or this is, Toyota are lean. What's really interesting is if you went into a Toyota factory and said you're lean, they wouldn't recognize that term. They'd say, we're on a drive for continuous improvement. We're trying to make every day better. And, we are really pushing this thing called Kaizen, continuous improvement in small steps. We don't recognize the term lean. So it's quite interesting.
So, you've talked about continuous improvement, but are there any other principles or ideas that form this thing that we call lean?
Yeah, what's really interesting is Toyota talk about two things. They talk about TPS, the Toyota Production System, which is tools and techniques to make your line more effective, make your logistics more effective, make your people more effective. They talk about this thing called the Toyota Way as well, which most of the books in the Western world don't talk about. And the Toyota Way is based on two things, people and process. And within people, about how you develop people, treat people, look after people, including suppliers, including partners and customers. And it's about process, having really well set out standardized processes so you've got a repeatable outcomes every time and all of the time. And that's the baseline which you can then continue and improve from. So, yeah, there's two things within the lean area, TPS and the Toyota Way.
And you've talked about manufacturing, but if I understand it right, we'll come into Develop Consulting and what it is in a minute. If I've got it right, there's sort of a mission you're on that's to help increase productivity and a bunch of other things. And I have a sense it's broader than manufacturing, particularly in the UK. There's a sense, I think it may be overstated, but a sense that, well, we don't do manufacturing. I think we do, but nevertheless, there's a big part of the economy that isn't that. Do these same ideas apply in things that aren't quite an assembly line in the factory?
Yeah, absolutely. Because lean is based on people and process, if you take it at its core, that can be applied to any sector. So that can be applied to the service sector, where you don't make anything, you process things, information normally. That can be applied to the healthcare sector, where you process people and tests and diagnostics. And obviously it applies to all parts of manufacturing. At Develop, we're working with a range of clients who do a number of things, from making cars. We still work with people in the automotive sector, through to people who make trains, planes, components for trains, take things apart and maintain them, such as trains and aircraft. But it is about people and process and how you set your business up for success, to create capacity, to create productivity and efficiency, and ultimately profit in the commercial sector.
So let's talk about Develop. What is it? Who works there? Who does it work with? What kind of firm is it?
Yeah, so we're a small boutique or niche consultancy.
Mm-hmm.
We founded, as you quite rightly say, in 2018. We employ people from mainly with an engineering and production background from all sorts of disciplines. But at the core of our business and the heart of our business is people with automotive and primarily Toyota experience. So lots of us in the business have worked for Toyota or worked for a Toyota supply chain and then have learnt our skills in factories before coming into consultancy to help others on their mission to implement efficiency and productivity and capacity.
So at one level, I could hear any business, it's about making money, and I'm sure that factors in there. But is there a purpose sort of beyond that?
Yeah, it's about how you empower your people. Now, empowerment is a hugely overused word and concerning word to many. When I work with businesses and my team, it's quite easy to convince the board or the CEO. We can make the business less chaotic. We can make the business more structured. We can make the processes more streamlined, and we can create efficiencies and productivity to deliver what your customer wants and when they want it and at the right price point. That's normally quite convincing and quite, relatively easy conversation. It's quite easy actually at the other end to convince the shop floor. Let's take some of this chaos away. Let's get things in a more organized fashion. Let's help you to be more productive and take away some of the problems and the noise. Where we find the sticking point often is in the middle management. And the reason for that is because they don't necessarily want to let go of the reins. They are the problem solvers of the business because they've grown through the business in many cases. And they don't want the shop floor to be empowered to make their own decisions or to improve things on their own. And part of our challenge is to get managers to say, well, how much time do you spend fixing things that shouldn't go wrong in the first place? How much time do you spend firefighting and trying to get the business to perform and the people and the processes? So if we could take that noise away, you'd have far more time to be proactive, to develop yourself, to develop your people, and look at the next iteration of the business, the next products coming through, for example, where to improve even further. So it is a self-fulfilling prophecy when you can create people time and help them see what's going on and help them to improve things, to give them more time. And that's always empowering to the people to take some of the frustration and the noise away.
And so when you do your work, do you come in and are you kind of trainers? Here's the Toyota production system. Here's the Toyota way. This is how you could apply these ideas here. Or do you come in and actually do some of it, lay out the assembly line differently, rewrite the job descriptions, whatever's involved?
Yeah, 100%. So we have built a real name for ourselves as being really hands-on and pragmatic. So consultancy the world over sometimes doesn't get a great name for itself because people advise, people write reports, people critique. We can do all of that, but our real niche and our real skill is helping people shoulder to shoulder with them, hands-on, to help them see what's going on, help them put a plan together or a roadmap of how to improve and what to improve, because you can't just translate what Toyota do into different businesses. The application is critical, and then help them on that journey. And if they haven't got the resource or the capacity or the capability, absolutely, we will roll our sleeves up and create processes, help them train people, help them with their customer, help them with their stakeholders, bosses, etc. So yeah, we are really hands-on. Logic behind that is knowledge transfer. So as with, our last business, KM&T, Knowledge Management Transfer, we called it, because we're trying to do what it said on the tin. We'll bring our expertise, we'll accelerate your journey, we'll give your people new skills, we'll develop new processes or ways of working. And then because we co-produce it with the workforce, they will carry on and sustain it as we peel off and go somewhere else to help somebody else.
And so that strategy of working shoulder to shoulder across a number of different sectors, how'd you get to that strategy? Is that sort of what you started the business with? Has it been refined? Who was involved in it?
Yeah, so we try and practice what we preach. And so we have a 5-year plan. And within that 5-year plan is, what are our growth ambitions? How are we going to develop our business, our people? How are we going to stay current? And then what sectors are we going to support and approach? And being small and niche, we've got the luxury that we've only got a few mouths to feed. There's 40-ish in the core team, plus associates. So we can pick and choose. And where we've made a name for ourselves and ended up is in some of the niche businesses. So some of the high complexity, in terms of product or process or supply chain, but maybe low volume. So things like luxury cars, so hypercars, we've worked with many of the mainstream automotive OEMs, but we've found ourselves in recent years working with some of the high-end niche. So they don't make huge volumes, 100 cars, 50 cars, but they're very complex because they're very configured to customer order, and the supply chain isn't as strong as a mainstream OEM. So they have to work really hard with their suppliers to get what they want when they need it and structure that supply chain. Very similar in rail because, you don't make hundreds of trains, but the trains are very complex. It's configured to customer order and region, normally in the UK. So we've tended to end up in these niche sectors with niche products.
So Steve, in my mind, as you're talking that through, there's a little bit of my brain that's going, but. So when I think of Toyota, I think of, millions and I think of factories, where they're churning out stuff, every couple of minutes, another vehicle rolls off the line. That may be a mistaken impression of Toyota, but nevertheless, that's what's in my head. Whereas you're talking, 100 a year. So how does that whole continuous improvement, standardization, get rid of the chaos, how does that even find enough repeatability to get to work?
Yeah, absolutely. If you think of Toyota and what they're doing today and what they were doing when I was there, you're producing a car every 60 seconds or so. Toyota last year made over 9 million vehicles globally. So, we were trying to critique our processes down to the last half a second. If we could save half a second in a process, that was a great result. And people would say, you're crazy. Why are you bothered about half a pence, half a second, 1 percentage point improvement? Because of the volume, massively magnified. And because of the size of Toyota globally, it magnified across different factories. So that one idea I've got to save half a second might apply to one or all of the factories. So the magnitude was huge. The principles of what we were trying to do, build a car in the shortest time, in the most effective, productive, efficient way, in the safest way for our employees, to deliver exactly what the customer wanted in terms of value for money, quality, etc., applies whether you're making one boat or ship a year to 100, comes back to the principle of people and process. So if I know what the customer wants, one a year, and if we've got really complex processes to produce that product of one a year, how do we make that process more efficient? How do we look at the year's program, work out who's working on what parts? Can we work in parallel? What supply chain is required at what times throughout that year, for example? So the principle is absolutely the same, but the application is very different in terms of what you implement, how you implement it, and what you standardize and how you standardize.
As you're describing that, it almost sounds like it's taking a continuous improvement approach to projects.
Yeah, 100%. A product where you build one a year is more project management based. A product that you're building one every 60 seconds is highly process based.
Yeah.
And you balance the line and you balance the work so that the worker can complete his or her tasks within 60 seconds and then reset and get ready for the next 60 seconds. Yeah, it's a lot easier to train and design a process at 60 seconds than it is 60 days or 6 months.
And sorry, a question that might take us a little bit off the trail for a minute, and might sound political, but as we are recording this, High Speed 2 is yet one more time in the news about, is it even going to go ahead, et cetera, et cetera. Do you wish they'd given you a call? Can the approaches you're talking about work in the middle of something that's so big with such changes in kind of what they're even trying to do, or is it no, that's a point of chaos beyond which it's really not going to help?
So High Speed 2 is obviously very, very complex. Pre-COVID, we absolutely need High Speed 2. The network is full. There's not enough room for moving freight around. So the network is absolutely full. So to have, like other countries, a dedicated line that doesn't have to stop at crossings and is a high-speed line was a necessity. Obviously, that project's been refined and changed. It was going to go to the north of England. It now isn't. It's going to stop in Birmingham. As with all of these government projects, there's the infrastructure side with the groundworks and the track and all the infrastructure that goes with that. And then there's the train build. The train factories we've worked in that will build, that are efficient. Their supply chains are less efficient, and their ability to get everything to come together at the right time to build a train on time to budget often needs a bit of support. But the factories are relatively good, and the volume of HS2, the number of cars, the number of trains, is fairly small compared to what these factories have been used to building in the past over the last 10, 15 years, replacing fleets. The bit that the taxpayer and always makes the news is the fact that these things always go late, particularly on the infrastructure side, and often are over budget because they go late and because things weren't estimated or planned in the first place. So yeah, it's any government project like that is highly, highly political, but is under a huge amount of scrutiny as well, similar to the NHS that we work in as well.
And so what you plan over the next several years?
Yeah, so we've had a really steady growth over the last 8 years. We've set realistic targets in terms of our own internal targets and then which sectors we would like to target. We can see some emerging sectors at the minute, which we're involved in and want to get more involved in. So things like airports, passengers are flying more, a little bit down the last couple of months for obvious reasons. Passengers are flying more, so numbers are up past pre-19 numbers. Therefore, the infrastructure in the airports needs to get better to cope with more passengers. People can't necessarily afford lots of new aircraft, and there's a backlog with people like Airbus, so people are going to maintain their aircraft and keep them going for longer and modify them. And we've got lots of MRO experience there. Yeah, maintenance and operations, so aircraft maintenance, not just aircraft, but also rail as well. So lots of new trains out there, but there's lots of existing trains that need to keep going for longer, and so the maintenance regimes and programs around trains, because obviously with a train and a plane, it only makes money when it's full of passengers. So having it sat in a depot or in a hangar, being fitted out, refurbed and serviced is wasted time for the airlines and the rail companies. And then obviously defence. Defence is a key sector for us because people are just starting to change what's required from defence. So things like drones and submersibles, manned and unmanned, rather than huge warships that take 10 years to build at a cost of billions to the taxpayer. They're changing their strategy slightly to go for lower cost, sometimes single use, which our automotive experience is perfectly suited towards helping those companies.
One sector you've touched on that I'd like to come back and sort of explore a little bit is healthcare, because that one level, it sort of sounds like the extreme of everything's different. Everybody needs something different. Everybody, there's vastly different skill sets. If you think of a hospital, there's all sorts of different people in it. There's all sorts of different patients coming in at different times. And how do you even begin to get your arms around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we've been involved in healthcare for over 20 years. We started in hospitals, and believe it or not, hospitals are very similar to factories. So you could argue ED at the front end is a factory or a micro factory. Outpatients at the back end is a factory, the way you bring people back in and process them. And then wards and theatres in the middle are definitely like a factory. The difference is we're processing people and people are processing people and looking after people. But if you break a hospital down into those functions, a program to support the nurses in a ward to rehabilitate patients and look after them and project manage patients. We can't use those words, but effectively that's what we'd like to do. Is better for the patient because you've got a clear plan, care plan. Is better for the family because the patient goes ideally home or back to the next place. And is better for the system because we're not blocking beds and we're not costing the taxpayer a fortune in terms of block beds and people that are in beds that should be at home or should be at next point of care, care homes and things.
There's an awful lot of discussion about pathways in the NHS. You're on this pathway or that pathway or whatever. Is that the same as a process or is that something different? And do you get involved in that?
So in commercial world, we'd call it an end-to-end process, or we'd call it a value stream. A pathway is a value stream. Even more set out and standardised in the health system is those pathways are standardised. So for medical reasons and to be able to train all the doctors and the clinicians and the protocols that go with it, those pathways are highly standardised. Where the NHS has grown over 70 years, though, is it's a big organisation and it's called the National Health Service, the NHS. But actually, you can't manage the National Health Service because the needs of a patient and a population locally are very different, from a metro city centre to a rural leafy village somewhere. So you have to look at the local population and then design your services and provision, as they call it, to accommodate and service those patients and those populations. And the NHS are just getting there now with neighbourhoods you'll read in the papers. So how do we structure things at a neighbourhood or a place level around our patients? And we've been an advocate of this for over 10 years. We wrote a paper in 2015 saying we've got to go to population health and we've got to go to provision and the money around the patient, because what's happened in the last 70 years is we've designed these organisations, the NHS is quite siloed, and then what we have to do is manage the patient through the silos, which is why you get delays, which is why you get miscommunication, which is why the patient experience isn't always great, because they get passed from department to department, pillar to post. Whereas what we need to do is put the care around the patient so that their journey or their pathway is seamless and the professionals come to them in a much more organised and more efficient and productive way.
I read something in the press today that was arguing that if things stay on current course, which of course we hope they might not, or at least around this, is that by the back end of the 2030s, that 9% of everybody working in the UK will be working in healthcare, which just, I mean, by the way, it's already about 6, so it's not a crazy number. Do you think what you're doing and what, if more people adopted the kind of approach you're talking about, could we see really major improvements in productivity, or is it, no, it's just going to help stem the tide? It's not going to turn things around necessarily, but at least it won't get worse so fast.
So there's a national challenge at the minute on productivity. So they want to see between 2 and 5% improvement in productivity. How you measure that is quite difficult in the NHS context. They want to see a left shift. So the hospitals are full and there isn't any more space, beds, staff necessarily. So how do we left shift, they call it, into community, into GPs and primary care, which is great if they had capacity. So they've got to create capacity through productivity, and they've got to work out some really difficult subjects. So one of the misnomers in the NHS is we've got to provide everything for everybody. And it's like, well, if you look at your data and you look at your population, you actually don't. Because if you, again, a leafy rural village where the population age is over 60, what you're providing to patients over 60 is very different to the centre of a major city where the population might be 25 to 35. Mm-hmm. You know, the way you set up your GPs, the way you set up your access, as we call it, to clinicians is very different, because, you know, a 25-year-old is unlikely to take time off work to go to a GP or go to a walk-in centre, but they will go out of hours at 8 or 9 at night. So you need to accommodate for that and set up your GPs maybe, 12 till midnight, for example, rather than 9 till 5. So it's going to take a huge upturn of the traditional sort of 9 till 5, 5 days a week, etc., to accommodate for those populations. But yeah, the productivity agenda is definitely there. We wrote a series of national programs for the NHS way back from 2006 to about 2011. And it was all about how do you improve control, grip, activity, visibility. So again, very similar to what we do in a factory, but for a ward or a theatre or an outpatients clinic or an ED department. And then you layer the clinical model on top. How do you triage? How do you make decisions faster? And the productivity, they will absolutely outweigh the 5% target if they go back to basics and manage the basics properly.
One of the things that seems to come into that is, even just in what you've been talking about, there's a lot of different stakeholders, the patients' families, the clinicians, et cetera. How do you, in the work you're doing in healthcare, how do you kind of navigate through all that?
Yeah, so it is really critical to engage those stakeholders, all levels and all disciplines, because you will never get an agreed process in without the stakeholder buy-in, and particularly the clinicians. If you talk to some of the surgeons, for example, in theatres about management productivity, about profit, or they're not interested. What they are interested in is the safety and the experience that their patient will go through, and more importantly, the outcome. So you have to change the language. Again, it's a bit like the CEO of a factory. It's quite easy to convince the CEO of a hospital or a region, we can make your people and your processes more productive. Absolutely, if you can do that, that hits the national agenda. It frees me up some capacity and some money usually to do other things with and be more proactive. Great. But when you're on the shop floor, working with the nurses and the surgeons and the clinicians, you have to change the language, because it's less about the management speak and more about the patient.
We also touched on manufacturing. Just if you can, what's your take on both the problems and the opportunities for manufacturing in the UK?
So manufacturing in the UK is going through a significant amount of change. So I was fortunate to write some articles on this in a magazine many years ago. And manufacturing about 10 years ago was really strong in the UK. The automotive companies, the amount of cars produced in the UK and exported, the amount of trains or components for aircraft, etc. So manufacturing through to food manufacturing and others, absolutely booming in the UK. Manufacturing is still strong. It accounts for, I think, close to 5%. I think in 2024, it was over 800 million sales from UK manufacturers. And I think that contributes something like 220 billion to the economy as part of the GDP, etc. So it is strong, but the problem is we're not investing in it sufficiently. So we're not supporting supply chain. So it's okay having a manufacturer such as a big car manufacturer, Toyota, a Jaguar Land Rover, etc. in the UK, but we need to be investing in the supply chain and the resource. And we've told, my take on it is we have a generation gap, because we've told everybody in engineering and manufacturing that it's dirty work, it's hard, it's shift-based, etc. So, of course, a lot of the students and the younger generation turn to other sectors. And actually, I could take you to factories where the shop floor is cleaner than an operating theatre, and it's a really nice place to work, and the products are really exciting product to work on. So I think we've got to dispel those myths. And I think, consequently, we've got a generation gap coming through where we've got to go back to the schools and back to the students and tell them how exciting it is. The one thing we are excellent at is quality and innovation and engineering in the UK. The one thing we are less competitive on is price. And so we've got to, follow the productivity and the efficiency agenda in order to be competitive with sort of Eastern Europe countries and further afield as well.
And if I remember right, you just said a couple minutes ago that you've kind of got 40 people on staff and then a network of associates. I mean, I'm sure you guys have a lot of impact, but what's it going to take to really shift the national productivity dial? Because I'm sure all of you working 7 days a week won't quite get there. So what else is needed?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. So you're absolutely right. It's a drop in the ocean. What can 40 of us do? But the results we're able to get and the legacy we're able to leave with these manufacturers and the health organisation is fantastic. And then we hope we've set them on the right journey to continue their journey with a good plan, with some good governance, and with the enthusiasm and the momentum to go forward. That again is just a drop in the ocean. So it needs the government to really support UK manufacturing. It needs the government to support other sectors, supply chain, skills. Every sector I go to, one of the biggest challenges is we just can't get the right skills, healthcare included as well in the UK. So yeah, we've got to invest in that.
For me, this is a topic that comes up in a number of the conversations we've had here on the podcast. And there's, for me, this continuing paradox, which you might have some insight on. I think you've touched on one or two aspects of it. But people are in some ways desperate to get people to work for them. Of course, they need to have the right set of skills. But then you've got particularly a younger generation that's struggling to find a job. And there's something missing in that equation. You think somehow the market would sort of sort itself out.
You're absolutely right. There's a real mismatch in the equation somewhere because people are crying out for capacity, resource, people, and the younger generation are saying it's really hard to get a job. So, I mean, one of the big pushes was apprenticeships. I was fortunate enough to go to university, but many of my friends and many of my colleagues came through the apprenticeship route, and it's an amazing route to encourage young people who don't want to continue with education or can't afford to continue with education to go and be sponsored, go and work in a factory or a business or a hospital and learn on the job with some academia behind them. So it's a really good way. And again, the government have been brilliant over the generations of promoting apprenticeships and funding apprenticeships and making it easy for businesses to take people on without the financial burden or the risk. They are still in place, but it's slowed down because other priorities have kind of stepped in or taken over. So yeah, it's one way the government can help industry, help healthcare to generate this new talent pool that we need.
It does feel to me, I couldn't spell it out, but it feels to me like there's a interesting space where the work you do and apprenticeships, building skills could really usefully come together. Like I say, I couldn't draw out the diagram of how it works, but it just feels like that they ought to mesh together somehow. Do you ever see that happening?
Yeah, I think giving apprentices the core skills to do the job is great. Giving them a mentor in a business, not just for the skills they need, but for the way they approach work, their attitude towards work and employment and other things is fantastic. Almost like a father or a parent figure. I think where we come in is accelerating them on that journey, giving them additional skills to be able to, manage KPIs and manage project plans and manage themselves, manage the way they interact with stakeholders and communicate with other stakeholders, either peers or seniors, etc. I think we don't teach that so much. So we could absolutely support them in a training sense, but also on the job, give them opportunities to get involved. I mean, one of the things we do, as we said earlier, is empower. And people get scared by that word because it's like, well, you're just taking the boundaries away and letting them run riot. And it's not about that. It's about empowering people within boundaries to say, but you are the local expert. So within Lean, we flip the pyramid, as we call it. So if you imagine a hierarchy pyramid in a business where, you got operator or worker on the bottom and CEO on the top, we say the operator is the most important person because they are doing the job day in, day out. They know what works and doesn't work. They know when it goes wrong, how to fix it, generally. They're the closest to the customer. So they're the one adding value into the service or the process. So in Lean, we talk about flipping the pyramid and putting the operator at the top of the pyramid. And then everybody else in the hierarchy is there to support that operator to have the best process, have the most training, be able to fulfill their job every time, as we said earlier, in 60 seconds or 60 days, but be able to do their job to the best of their ability. And that's a real mind shift change for many senior leadership teams because, well, I've earned my right to be here. I've come through the business or the sector or the industry, and I know the most about it. And it's saying, well, you do, but you're quite detached. I often say to people, go to the place of the work. If something's gone wrong, go down there and see what went wrong. If something's going well, go down there and congratulate your people. Give them a pat on the back because a pat on the back goes way further than any award scheme or bonus scheme and that kind of thing. But more importantly, you'll find out more in 5 minutes on the shop floor talking to the workforce than you will in 5 hours of board meetings and management meetings.
So, Steve, a bit of a cheeky question. Everything you're talking about sounds like something that almost any business, once it's past a certain relatively small size, a set of capabilities that they'd want to have in-house. So why do CEOs bring you in?
Yeah, so consultancy, as I said before, has got a really, when you say I'm a consultant, we prefer the word coach or support, etc. My view is 3 reasons. You either have no idea what to do because it's new and you need a plan, you need a strategy, and you need someone to help you do it. You know exactly what you need to do, but you don't have any in-house capability or capacity to do it. Or you've got some in-house capability or capacity, but it's not enough or it won't get you there quick enough because they've either got to learn on the job or they've got other priorities, etc. So most businesses, large businesses, have an improvement team or OPEX team. Most hospitals have a CI, QI or OPEX team. But the reason we're brought in is because we can accelerate that journey or describe that journey far quicker. The other thing is, as being an external, we can jump the hierarchies. So if, the middle management aren't particularly engaging, we can quite easily have a conversation with the senior management or the CEO and say, look, in our opinion, in our advice is we need to address some of these issues sort of thing, which you can't do when you're an internal because of you don't want to jump hierarchies and the boss, etc. So there are a number of advantages, but it does come at an additional cost to just having your own team. So the payback and the ROI has to justify itself. So I'm pleased to say that all of our projects, even basic training projects, provide an ROI because of that implementation and the benefits that we implement during the time we're with a company rather than just, write the report and tell them what they think about.
So we've touched on a number of different topics, everywhere from, HS2, healthcare, manufacturing, apprenticeships, a whole load of things. Is there anything else you'd like to make sure we cover or anything else you'd want to share with the audience?
No, I think it's been a really interesting debate and set of questions and a discussion. Thank you. I would just urge people listening to take a good look at their business, look at what their customers want, go back to first principles like Toyota and work out what they can do to improve themselves and then what they might need help to improve and then engage with the right people to help. The people I'm talking to are saying times are tough in the UK, particularly at the minute. It's how the brave will sort of grasp that opportunity and make the most of it.
Good. Well, again, Steve, thanks for joining us. I wish you and Develop Consulting all the best. I'm personally of the opinion that many of the things that are sort of difficult in the UK right now could be addressed if we had more people at work more productively. So I don't know if you can cover the first, but it sounds like you've got some contribution to make to the second.
Absolutely.
All righty. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Purposeful Strategist. In addition to being available on our website, You can also find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, please do follow us and leave a 5-star review. It helps others find the podcast. Thanks again, and join us soon for the next episode of The Purposeful Strategist.